Security Ecuadorian Embassy and encourage us in our struggle. And in solidarity with Julian Assange.
This is Radio Free Assange.
Les pères fondateurs ne pensaient pas que la tyrannie puisse surgir de l'exécutif, parce qu'ils ne voyaient dans celui-ci rien d'autre que la simple exécution de ce qu'avait décidé le législateur. Nous savons aujourd'hui que le plus grand danger de tyrannie vient de l'exécutif. Mais si nous prenons à la lettre l'esprit de la Constitution, que pensaient les pères fondateurs? Ils pensaient s'être libérés d'abord de la domination de la majorité. C'est pourquoi ce serait une grave erreur de penser que ce que nous avons est une démocratie. Ce que nous avons ici, c'est un système républicain. Les pères fondateurs s'attachaient surtout à préserver les droits des minorités parce qu'ils estimaient que dans un corps politique sain, il doit y avoir une pluralité d'opinions. Ce que les Français appellent l'union sacrée était précisément pour eux ce dont il ne fallait pas. Ce serait déjà une sorte de tyrannie, et le tyran pourrait très bien être une majorité.
This is Radio Free Assange.
No extradition! There's only one decision! No extradition! There's only one decision! No extradition! There's only one decision! No extradition! There's only one decision!
We fell in love, and this is a person that I knew well by then, the person I know the most in this world. He's extraordinary. He's generous, and he's very tender and loving. Forming a family was a deliberate decision to kind of break down those walls around him and see life, imagine a life beyond that prison. And so, while for many people it would seem insane to start a family in that context, for us it was the same thing to do. It was what keeps things real. And it does. It grounds me. And when Julian sees the children, it gives him a lot of peace and nurture. I compare it to being in a war zone, constant relentless attacks. That there are operations underway, and it's not some crazed conspiracy theory. It's part of the reality of the context in which everything to do with Julian exists. Just like in war, people fall in love and decide to live their lives in an act of rebellion, I think. Falling in love is kind of an act of rebellion in a context where there's a lot of attempts to destroy your life and your reason for doing what you're doing. The older one is actually very much like Julian. He looks a lot like Julian, especially around the eyes, the kind of the eyebrows, and the gaze is very much Julian's. The little one looks more like me, and he has Julian's ears and Julian's size because he's very big, and he looks like his brother. But of the two of them, the older one is very Julian. Yeah. When I found out that my baby was targeted, a guard actually went up to me and told me that they were trying to steal the DNA. I realized that I couldn't really protect my family. Even if I took all these steps, more steps than most people, to try to preserve our privacy and our security and Julian's safety, ultimately. In a way, it was beyond my control, and that was very difficult to realize. I understood that the powers that were against Julian were ruthless and there were no bounds to it, because there's a lawlessness around it, and they were after my baby's DNA, but what else are they after?
Okay.
Ready?
Are we ready for
You ready? Where is
1
he?
second.
Yeah.
1 second.
Okay, today we had morning session and the afternoon session, two lots of witnesses that the prosecution to turn their testimony around to declaring that the jail in the United States, in the ADX Colorado, which the warden of the ADX Colorado at Florence testifies openly, she'll be testifying tomorrow, testifies openly that it's like hell on earth, it's death in life. Well, the prosecution spent all day trying to prove that it was like a country club, that it had this facility and that facility, and if you felt a tummy ache, you'd get pills, and if you got a headache, you'd get a psychologist, and so on and so forth. It was really, really quite embarrassing. But just always keep in mind that what this is about is trying to disguise war crimes. Just repeat, understand over and over again. What it is trying to disguise war crimes so that they can continue to commit them against us, just ordinary people. That's who they commit these. They're not brave enough to fight other soldiers. They just attack us with sanctions. 500,000 children died, and Madam Albright says, well, we think it's worth it. 500,000 children. That's 1 million parents. That's 4 million grandparents in tears. So keep that in mind. That's what this is about. So we won't know, and we will not be able to act to determine that these crimes against us stop. Thank you.
Well, thank you, John.
Somehow underlining and subscribing is, I mean, legally one cannot separate today from last week, because last week we heard the witnesses on actually the medical situation of Julian Assange and how actually he is currently medical, that he's actually facing the risk of suicide, that he's basically facing hallucination in the solitary confinement in the UK in Belmarsh. And what we today learned actually is that how actually pre-trial detention in the US works from the both of the witnesses. Both of them confirmed that in the pre-trial detention prisons in the US, it's actually difficult to gain access to specific medical access, psychiatric access, which actually Julian Assange would need, and this actually then would again face actually this would again lead to the reality that actually Julian Assange faces suicide, because this is what we actually learned last week, that this is really a real risk. And if in the US actually there is no medical access really guaranteed in the sense, this leads actually to the one and only reaction that Julian Assange should be released here and today and should not be extradited. But from a legal point of view, today it was interesting as well to listen and to hear that actually the case of Julian Assange on the one hand is the case of Julian Assange, but in the past there have been some rulings of the European Court of Human Rights on how or whether on the US and the situation of prisons in the US and on the difficult situation in the US, and where actually the European Court of Human Rights took a stand on the difficult situation in US prisons, which should not, which in the end should not the UK extradite Julian Assange to the US, because already in the past there have been rules by the European Court of Human Rights which were very clear that actually pre-trial detention in the US is not always complying with international human rights standards. And I think this is important to acknowledge. And this, I think, why today actually the two witnesses have been crucial. I'm not commenting on what John already said, that actually the only strategy by the prosecution questioning the independence of witnesses, I would say it's in the end a very weak strategy from our perspective, because if you don't have any argument really commenting on the actual substance, what actually today was a strategy by the prosecution, it's weak if you're only arguing and questioning the witness. And so that's why I would say today was another day of witnesses showing that Julian Assange needs to be released immediately. And if this court here is independent, I think the only decision compiling all the testimonies for the judge could and should be that Julian Assange should be released immediately and should not be extradited.
We saw the prosecution today compare Julian Assange, a non-violent intellectual journalist, to somebody that has been convicted for several lifetimes for trying to blow up a plane. And they actually compared the treatment of both as they would be alike.
This was indeed actually quite disturbing, actually, comparing Julian Assange to actual terrorists, people who consciously made exploding people, consciously made, basically killed people. And I mean, all of us here know that Julian Assange published documents which the public needed to know about, and I think that's why it was really disturbing comparing Julian Assange to actual terrorists who made people kill. And I think this, in the end, I think that's unacceptable.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you.
This is Radio Free Assange.
We are now approaching the state of Orwell's dictum, perfect dictum, that he who controls the present controls the past. He who controls internet servers controls the intellectual record of mankind, and by controlling that, controls our perceptions of who we are, and by controlling that, controls what laws and regulations we make in society.
This is Radio Free Assange.
They are about to take every right away from you. You will not be able to fight for any other cause. We are talking about the fundamentals here. We must fight against the extradition. We must save Julian Assange.
What did you see today?
Today we heard expert witnesses on prison conditions, pre-trial and after, for possible pre-trial prison conditions or jail conditions, as they're called, and prison conditions afterwards. And we heard some shocking things. Especially there was one expert, Mr. Ellis, talking about his experience with pre-trial conditions for high-profile and national security inmates, and the prison where Mr. Assange would probably be held pre-trial has a place called X block, or the technical term is administrative segregation, where people are held that are not supposed to have contact to other inmates. And there you are basically alone all day. You just get out for walking around a bit. He even mentioned that there's not even a ward present because it's only 4 or 5 cells. And for example, when the prosecution mentioned that Mr. Kronberg stated in his affidavit that inmates have the possibility to talk to other inmates through the walls or the windows, he spoke from his experience that it's impossible because there's a plexiglass window without any holes or something, and that people, if they want to talk or say something, they have to scream because it's soundproof, isolated. When he went, the witness, Mr. Ellis, when he went there to talk to his clients and want to talk to them, he could not talk to them through the door. Some ward had to open the secure food lock where the food is put through to be able to understand what they're saying. So it's technically it is segregation. It's basically isolation. They have no contact to other people. And as we heard before last week from the medical witnesses, Mr. Assange's mental health is not reacting well on such conditions. So it was quite concerning to hear about what he could face in the States. Afterwards, we had a second witness who has experience with inmates for 30 or 40 years. I don't recall the exact number. 40 years. When the prosecution asked him about how he knows things, he just said, "I'm doing this for 40 years." And yeah, he also confirmed that there are very similar conditions at the high-security ADX prisons, where high-profile people and national security risk people are held. And we just had a 2.5-hour cross-examination by the prosecution. It was almost unbearable. She was basically, she put the witness on a stand and put him through an exam, asking him questions, technical questions about particular rules for 2.5 hours. I feel like we got not a lot from that examination. It was very horrible for a witness in the United States that had to get up very early, and it was an interesting day, and we can all assume, or we all assume that prison conditions in the United States are not the best after all. The prosecution on behalf of the United States is of course trying to give the impression that it's totally different and it's a great places, but I think that it's not the case, and I think that people who are held under like special measurements have a very, very tough time, and I think the witnesses made that very clear today.
Thank you.
This is Radio Free Assange.
We are now approaching the state of Orwell's dictum, perfect dictum, that he who controls the present controls the past. He who controls internet servers controls the intellectual record of mankind, and by controlling that, controls our perceptions of who we are, and by controlling that, controls what laws and regulations we make in society.
This is Radio Free Assange.
They are about to take every right away from you. You will not be able to fight for any other cause. We are talking about the fundamentals here. We must fight against the revolution. We must save Julian Assange.
Every single, all the most powerful intelligence agencies in the world dedicating significant resources over the past 10 years to destroying his reputation. So it's at a stage now where it's actually you risk something to even defend him. So the facts are very hard to get out, but when you start looking into it, you see that actually this is not a fair trial at all, and from start to finish it's been irregular, and it's actually a real stain on the British state and the British justice system that they won't live down. I mean, when Edward Snowden tweeted when Assange was grabbed from the embassy by British police, he said something along the lines of this will define Britain's attitude to the free press for generations, and it's true. I mean, that image will live in infamy. So we need to make sure Britain does not become a party to what would be one of the biggest nails in the coffin of the free press that the world has ever seen, maybe the biggest nail in the coffin. So, and for all the people that are watching who live in Britain, you live in the most important jurisdiction for any kind of activism on this topic, because if he goes to the US, he's got no chance. The real chance he has to avoid and his life be saved and avoid extradition is in the UK. So we really need to focus efforts in the run-up to September to expose the irregularities, to expose the bias, and try and get justice.
This is Radio Free Assange.
We're discussing here whether Assange or someone else has done something wrong or not. But what about the war crimes? We are living in a time when our own war crimes are no longer prosecuted. We know that we have conducted aggressive wars. We've hanged people on Nuremberg for this. 175 years for whatever we're accusing Mr. Assange of. This certainly is not violence, certainly is not genocide, certainly is not massacring civilians or torturing anybody. And people for genocide in The Hague, they received 35 or 45 years.
Free! Julian Assange! Free! Free! Julian Assange! Free! Free! Julian Assange!
You're listening to
Free
Assange.
This is Radio Free Assange.
Basically, I think that Julian Assange is he's a very brave guy. He's a fantastic journalist. He's one of the sort of he's basically being put in prison because he's too good. That's the problem. He's the promise of a free media, which we haven't really had before. We've just had propaganda, and I think that's basically why these sort of powerful states such as Britain and the US can't live with him.
This is Radio Free Assange.
Free Julian Assange! No extradition!
This is Radio Free Assange. Journalism is not a crime. Free Julian Assange.
No extradition!
This is Radio Free Assange.
Julian Assange!
Good afternoon, Julian Assange. We are here to support you.
Free Julian Assange! Free Julian Assange! Free Julian Assange!
23 hours a day in a cell in a high maximum security Ecuadorian embassy and encourage us in our struggle. And in solidarity with Julian Assange,
This is Radio Free Assange.
Les pères fondateurs ne pensaient pas que la tyrannie puisse surgir de l'exécutif, parce qu'ils ne voyaient dans celui-ci rien d'autre que la simple exécution de ce qu'avait décidé le législateur. Nous savons aujourd'hui que le plus grand danger de tyrannie vient de l'exécutif. Mais si nous prenons à la lettre l'esprit de la Constitution, que pensaient les pères fondateurs? Ils pensaient s'être libérés d'abord de la domination de la majorité. C'est pourquoi ce serait une grave erreur de penser que ce que nous avons est une démocratie. Ce que nous avons ici, c'est un système républicain. Les pères fondateurs s'attachaient surtout à préserver les droits des minorités parce qu'ils estimaient que dans un corps politique sain, il doit y avoir une pluralité d'opinions. Ce que les Français appellent l'union sacrée était précisément pour eux ce dont il ne fallait pas. Ce serait déjà une sorte de tyrannie et le tyran pourrait très bien être une majorité.
This is Radio Free Assange.
No extradition! There's only one decision! No extradition! There's only one decision! No extradition! There's only one decision! No extradition! There's only one decision!
We fell in love, and this is a person that I knew well by then, the person I know the most in this world. He's extraordinary. He's generous and he's very tender and loving. Forming a family was a deliberate decision to kind of break down those walls around him and see life, imagine a life beyond that prison. And so, while for many people it would seem insane to start a family in that context, for us it was the same thing to do. It was what keeps things real. And it does. It grounds me. And when Julian sees the children, it gives him a lot of peace and nurture.